first presenter, Ana Maria, can join us.
Good afternoon, everyone, and thank you so much for being here. It's my first INVALSI actually, and I think it's the first time that I got to present on a Saturday. So thanks for everyone that is joining today. I'll present today work that we have been doing at the IA with my colleagues Ale Kennedy and Rolf Stithol on COVID-19 containment policies and student civic outcomes. We had a catchier title, I think, like civic education during lockdown, but a reviewer told us that we are not actually studying civic education during the time of the lockdown, so we decided to drop it. And just a bit of background, although I'm aware that all of us remember the COVID times. Although for me they feel a bit, I don't know, like a lifetime ago, and to others maybe they are a bit of a blocked memory. But so in response to the COVID-19 pandemic, many countries were faced with the decision to do something to slow or halt the spread of the virus. And one of the measures that was implemented were lockdown measures or other measures like school closures. And these measures had to be like balanced or weighed down into the potential consequences that they could have, but also the benefits in slowing the pandemic. There were a lot of concerns about the impact of these school closures on student achievement, on their learning progress, and since then there has been a fast-growing body of literature interested in studying, but also quantifying this effect of the pandemic on student learning. And there have been different meta-analyses, but also secondary analysis of ILSA data, trying to quantify this effect, and they talk about a substantial learning loss. And there is variation across countries, and these losses are stronger in countries that close schools for a longer period of time. However, this research has been mainly focused on subjects like mathematics and reading, and on cognitive outcomes, not just on other important outcomes of education. And domains like civics have been less studied. At the same time of these school closures and the potential impact on this learning loss, there's also other lockdown measures that were implemented, and that there is some evidence that they affected the civic engagement of the general population. And these measures presented specifically a challenge for democratic systems because it implied that they had to use exceptional powers to enforce these measures and restrict the civil liberties. There, again talking about like this cross-country variation, there are countries where the measures were very strict or for prolonged periods of time. There were other countries, like for example Mexico, where they were a bit more relaxed. Sure, the schools closed, moved to remote learning, some restaurants had to close, but in Mexico it was mainly about using QR codes in restaurants and the use of like this sanitizing floor mat to enter supermarkets and stores. And we even had like this superhero, the Susana Distancia, that encouraged people to keep like a healthy distance between each other. And then there were other countries like Cyprus, where you had to send an SMS before you had to go out to ask for authorization from the government. Even if you were just going out for a walk, you needed to send this SMS, receive the authorization, and then you could go out in the event that the police stopped you when you were outside. So all these measures had some side effects. There has been reports and evidence of an increase in protest activities in different countries, in Italy, in Germany, in the US, and there's also concerns and evidence on the shifts in democratic attitudes. In some countries, like in Mexico, some people were requesting or wanted a more authoritarian government that imposed some measures to sort of control the virus. And another of the shifts is a decreased trust in institutions, be it the government, but also other institutions like the media or pharmaceutical companies and even scientists. This research has focused on the adult population, and less is known on younger people, how they were impacted. So based on these two things, that civics has not been studied so far to the extent of reading and mathematics, and that what we know about some changes in civic engagement has been in the adult population. We set out this research to investigate what is the relationship between the duration or the stringency or strictness of COVID-19 measures and trends in student civic knowledge, but also in changes in student civic attitudes and engagement. For this, we use data from ICCS, from 2 cycles, from 2016 as a sort of baseline measure, but also from 2022, which is the first data point after the onset of the COVID pandemic. In the last cycle, in 2022, there were 22 countries that participated in 2 benchmarking systems, but when we check those that participated in both cycles, in our study we're focusing on 15 countries, or 14 systems and 1 benchmarking participant. We look at civic knowledge and then 3 outcomes from the student questionnaire: the trust in civic institutions and their expected participation in the future in protest activities, both the legal and the illegal kinds of protests. We complement this information with data from the Oxford Coronavirus Government Response Tracker, OXCGRT. I don't know if there's another way to pronounce that in a more catchy way. And this data set, so they collect daily information on different measures that governments implemented. This includes school closures, business closures, the cancellation of public events, restrictions on gatherings and stay-at-home orders, or also restrictions on travel. And one side is like the individual measures, but they also provide an index of stringency, which combines how many of these measures were in place and to what share of the population. And it goes from 0 to 100, so 0 like no measures were in place, everything was open, and 100 would be all these measures are in place and they are affected the large share of the population. From this, we focus on 2 variables. So one is the school closures, the number of days that schools were closed without taking into account public holidays or weekends, and also the average stringency index in the period from the onset of the COVID-19 pandemic and when data collection began for ICCS, which was around February 2022. Just to put something into context, the school closures in the countries or the systems in our sample, we have those that closed for very little time. So Taiwan, 43 days, but then Colombia closed for 224 days during this period. For the stringency index, Taiwan had the lowest one of 31, and then we have Italy with the highest stringency index, so most of the measures affecting the larger share of the population, and yeah, the index was 59. And in terms of civic knowledge, we don't have here the 2009, but so from 2009 to 2016, what was seen in ICCS, it was a general or slight increase in the trend in civic knowledge, but this was not the case from 2016 to 2022. Most of the countries sort of just like stagnated, and in some cases there were significant declines in student civic knowledge, like in Bulgaria, Colombia, and Denmark. Also Norway, Slovenia, and Sweden. So with this information, we exploit this cross-country variation in the changes in the outcomes, but also in how many policies were measured and for how long. To use this model where we're measuring the civic outcome, the knowledge or the attitudes of student I in country C at time T. And we have 2 time codes, 2016, 2022. And then we are interested on the COVID policy and how this can explain or be associated with how much it changed the outcome of the students from 2016 to 2022. We also control for several student level variables and country level variables in terms of things that might be related to these policies that were in place. So the number of cases per capita and the vaccination rates, because once the vaccine started to be rolled out, also some of these measures were a bit more relaxed. And just to show you first the relationship between average stringency and the scales. So on the left side is just the country level correlation between the lockdown stringency and each of the 4 measures, so knowledge, trust in institutions, the expected participation in legal and illegal activities. And very slightly, but there is a negative correlation with civic knowledge. a bit more pronounced for the trust in institutions, and there is an increase or a positive correlation between the measure and the change in these two cycles for the participation in protest activities. On the table is a standardized estimate of the model that I showed before, and we see significant effects of the stringency measure on knowledge and trust. So higher stringency or more strictness was associated with declines in achievement and institutional trust, whereas it was associated with increases in students' expectations to participate in protests in the future. Just going back to the original scales of the variables, like let's say a 10-point increase in this average stringency index is associated with a 4-point decline in civic knowledge across these countries, 0.7 drop in average trust in civic institutions, and a 1 and 0.5 increase in the legal and illegal activities scale. And again, just remembering that the stringency, it ranged so from 43 until 224, and the average was, those are the days. The average for the stringency was about 50. So for the school closures, which is the one that I was saying, that it ranged from 43 days in Taiwan to 224 in Colombia. We find a similar pattern, a bit more pronounced for civic knowledge. And yeah, it's pretty much the same. An increase in school closures in the country was associated with decreases in civic knowledge and trust in institutions, but with some small increases in students' willingness to participate in the future in protest activities. So imagining that countries closed for an additional 2 months after the pandemic, this is related to a 3.5 decline in civic knowledge and 0.6 drop in average trust in institutions, and then a 0.3 increase in the protest activity scale for both the legal and the illegal ones. And again, the average of this was 100 days across all these countries. So yeah, these declines in civic knowledge are even larger. Just to wrap up, I'm still, on time. So we started this because little is known about the pandemic effect on student civic outcomes, both their cognitive and their attitudes or behaviors and dispositions. And we find that for both measures, either the school closures or the stricter lockdown measures, they are related with declines in civic knowledge and institutional trust. These declines are smaller than the ones reported for mathematics and reading, but they're still there. There were significant declines, and stronger intention from the students to participate in protest activities. This is, to our knowledge, one of the first evidence on the topic of the pandemic and civic learning outcomes. And I think the overall aim is that when the pandemic started, little was known about, or not a lot of specific information was available about what could be the consequences for student learning. Hopefully we don't have to deal with such school closures or these measures again, but at least this can inform us better when making these decisions. And that's it. Thank you very much.